The silence at St. Mary's General Hospital was different on July 15th, 2023. Not the usual quiet that comes with the late shift, but something deeper, more unsettling. By morning, three nurses who'd been working the overnight rotation had simply vanished without a trace: Emma Rodriguez, Sarah Chen, and Nicole Thompson, all experienced professionals who'd never missed a shift, never caused problems, never given anyone reason to worry, until they disappeared into thin air. Emma was the charge nurse that night, a 15-year veteran who knew every corner of the hospital. Sarah had been covering the pediatric ward, always the first to volunteer for the tough cases. Nicole was fresh out of nursing school, but already earning respect from the senior staff. Three women from completely different backgrounds, united only by their dedication to helping others and their mysterious disappearance. The hospital administration tried to keep things quiet at first. Missing person reports were filed, security footage was reviewed, but nothing seemed out of place. The cameras showed all three nurses at their stations throughout the night going about their normal routines. Then, sometime between 3 and 4 a.m., the footage showed them walking toward the service elevator together. After that, nothing. The elevator led to the basement levels, where the hospital's mechanical systems were housed: boilers, electrical panels, and the connection point to the city's sewer system. It wasn't unusual for hospital staff to go down there occasionally, but at 3 a.m. with no maintenance requests logged, it raised questions that nobody could answer. Detective Marcus Sullivan took the case personally. His own daughter had been treated at St. Mary's the year before, and he remembered Sarah Chen sitting with her during a particularly difficult night. These weren't just missing persons to him, they were people who'd touched his life. He threw himself into the investigation with the kind of intensity that worried his partner. The first week brought nothing but dead ends. The nurses' personal lives were clean. No debts, no enemies, no signs of planning to disappear. Their cars were still in the hospital parking lot, their purses left behind at their stations. Emma's coffee was still warm when the day shift arrived and noticed they were gone. Local news picked up the story by the second week. 3 Angels of Mercy vanish, read the headline, accompanied by photos of the missing women in their scrubs. The hospital was flooded with tips, most of them useless. Psychics called claiming to have visions. Conspiracy theorists suggested government cover-ups, but nothing substantial emerged from the chaos of public attention. The families were devastated. Emma's husband, Carlos, couldn't sleep, pacing their empty house every night, calling her phone just to hear her voicemail. Sarah's parents flew in from California, camping out in the hospital lobby, as if their presence might somehow bring her back. Nicole's roommate from nursing school started a social media campaign that spread across the country, but online awareness didn't translate to real answers. Detective Sullivan expanded the investigation beyond the hospital walls. He interviewed every employee who'd worked that night, every patient who'd been awake, every security guard who'd made rounds. The pattern was always the same, everything normal until suddenly it wasn't. The 3 nurses had been seen, then they weren't, as if they'd simply evaporated. The hospital's basement became a focus of intense scrutiny. Every pipe, every tunnel, every access point was examined. The connection to the city sewer system was particularly intriguing. The hospital's waste management system tied into the main municipal network, a labyrinth of tunnels that stretched for miles beneath the city. But the connection points were secure, locked, and showed no signs of forced entry. Sullivan brought in specialists, forensic experts, who could detect trace evidence invisible to the naked eye, structural engineers who understood the hospital's layout better than the people who worked there, search and rescue teams trained in confined spaces. They found nothing that explained how 3 adult women could simply disappear from a building with dozens of security cameras and locked exits. The case began to take on an almost supernatural quality in the minds of the hospital staff. Nurses started requesting not to work the night shift. Security guards reported strange sounds from the basement levels. The hospital administration hired additional security and installed more cameras, but the measures felt like closing the barn door after the horses had escaped. Weeks turned into months. The media attention faded as newer stories captured the public's imagination. The families maintained their vigil, but even their hope began to show cracks. Detective Sullivan refused to let the case go cold, following every lead no matter how remote, but he was running out of places to look. Then, 7 months later, on a cold February morning, city sewer workers made a discovery that would change everything. A routine maintenance check in the tunnels beneath the downtown area revealed something that shouldn't have been there, something that would force everyone to reconsider what they thought they knew about the night 3 nurses walked into the darkness and never came back. The call came in at 6:47 a.m. City worker Frank Delgado was checking pressure readings in a section of the main sewer line when his flashlight beam caught something metallic wedged against the tunnel wall. At first, he thought it was debris, the kind of junk that sometimes washed down from storm drains. But as he got closer, his blood ran cold. It was a hospital ID badge, the kind worn by St. Mary's staff. The plastic was cracked and stained, but the photo was still visible. Sarah Chen's face looked back at him from the murky depths of the sewer system, her smile frozen in time from the day she'd posed for her employee photo. The discovery of Sarah Chen's ID badge had shattered any remaining hope that this was simply a case of 3 nurses who had lost their way. Detective Sullivan stared at the corroded plastic card, its magnetic strip long since destroyed by the acidic sewer environment, but the photo remained hauntingly clear. Sarah's face smiled back at him from what was now evidence of something far more sinister than anyone had imagined. The badge had been found embedded in a junction pipe nearly 2 miles from St. Mary's General Hospital, deep within the city's oldest sewer system. The location made no sense. There was no logical path from the hospital's basement to this remote section of the underground network. Yet here was undeniable proof that at least one of the nurses had been there. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the hospital's chief administrator, sat across from Sullivan in the sterile conference room, her hands trembling as she examined the evidence bag. "This can't be right," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the fluorescent lights. "The basement service elevator doesn't connect to the sewer system. It's physically impossible." But Sullivan had already verified the architectural plans. The hospital's basement level sat 15 feet above the main sewer line, with no direct access points. The building's drainage system connected to the municipal network through a series of smaller pipes, none large enough for a human to pass through. Yet Sarah's badge told a different story. The forensic team had worked around the clock to extract every possible detail from the corroded plastic. Traces of industrial cleaning chemicals clung to its surface, compounds that weren't used in standard hospital operations. More disturbing were the microscopic fibers embedded in the badge's lanyard, synthetic materials that matched no known fabric in the hospital's inventory. Someone wanted us to find this, Sullivan concluded, studying the evidence report. The badge's placement wasn't random. It had been deliberately positioned in a section of pipe that city workers regularly inspected, almost as if it were meant to be discovered. The question was whether it represented a cry for help or something far more calculated. The sewer workers who had made the discovery were brought in for questioning. Marcus Webb, a 20-year veteran of the city's sanitation department, described the moment he'd spotted the badge wedged against a concrete junction. It was fresh, he insisted, his weathered face creased with concern. I mean, not fresh, but it hadn't been there long. That pipe gets cleaned every 6 months, and I would have noticed something like that. His partner, Jerome Collins, nodded in agreement. The way it was positioned, almost like someone placed it there on purpose, and the condition it was in, despite being in the sewer for months, it was too well preserved, like maybe it was protected somehow before ending up there. The implications were chilling. If the badge had been placed recently, it meant someone had access to evidence from the nurse's disappearance, someone who wanted to send a message or perhaps redirect the investigation. But if it had been there since the night the nurses vanished, it suggested a level of planning that made Sullivan's blood run cold. Hospital security footage from the night of the disappearance was reviewed once again, frame by frame. The 3 nurses entering the basement elevator remained the last clear image of Emma Rodriguez, Sarah Chen, and Nicole Thompson. But now Sullivan noticed something he'd missed before. In the reflection of the elevator's polished metal doors, a shadow moved in the background. It was barely visible, lasting only a fraction of a second, but it was there. Technical specialist Janet Morrison enhanced the footage, adjusting contrast and brightness until the shadow became more defined. It's definitely a person, she confirmed, pointing to the ghostly figure on her monitor. Tall, wearing what looks like dark clothing. They're moving deliberately, not like someone who's supposed to be there. The shadow appeared to be heading toward the same area of the basement where the service elevator was located, but hospital records showed no authorized personnel in that section during the overnight shift. The figure remained unidentified, a phantom presence that somehow connected to the nurse's disappearance. Dr. Hendricks authorized a complete search of the hospital's basement level, including areas that had been sealed off for years. Maintenance crews worked through the night, checking every storage room, utility closet, and forgotten corner of the sprawling underground facility. What they found in a long-abandoned laboratory sent shockwaves through the investigation. The room had been sealed since the hospital's renovation in 2018, its entrance hidden behind a false wall that required maintenance blueprints to locate. Inside, dust covered outdated medical equipment and forgotten research materials. But in the center of the room, the dust had been disturbed. Recent footprints crisscrossed the floor, leading to a drain that connected to the main sewer system. Someone's been using this room, Sullivan observed, crouching beside the disturbed dust patterns. And recently, The footprints were multiple sizes, suggesting several people had been in the space. Some appeared to be from standard work boots, others from what looked like medical sneakers, the type worn by hospital staff. The drain itself had been modified. What should have been a simple floor drain had been enlarged, its grate removed and replaced with a hinged cover that could be opened from above. The modification was professional, requiring both engineering knowledge and access to specialized tools. This wasn't the work of a desperate improvisation, but careful planning. Sullivan's team descended into the sewer system through the modified drain, following a path that led directly to the section where Sarah's badge had been found. The route was treacherous, requiring navigation through narrow pipes and flooded chambers, but it was passable, and it connected the hospital directly to the city's underground network. Evidence of recent passage was everywhere. Scrape marks on pipe walls showed where someone had moved through the confined spaces. Chemical residue on the concrete matched the compounds found on Sarah's badge. Most disturbing were the makeshift markers, small scratches carved into the pipe walls that seemed to indicate direction or distance. The markers led to a junction chamber deep beneath the city, a cavernous space where multiple sewer lines converged. Here, the evidence became overwhelming. Personal items that clearly belonged to the missing nurses were scattered throughout the chamber, arranged in a pattern that suggested both desperation and deliberate placement. Nicole Thompson's stethoscope hung from a pipe fitting, its metal surface tarnished but recognizable. Emma Rodriguez's hospital badge was wedged into a crack in the concrete wall, positioned where anyone entering the chamber would see it. But it was the discovery of Sarah's nursing shoes that confirmed Sullivan's worst fears. The shoes showed signs of prolonged wear in the sewer environment, their soles worn smooth by constant contact with wet concrete. But they also showed evidence of restraint. Marks around the ankle area suggested the shoes had been worn while the wearer was bound. The implication was clear. The nurses had been held captive in this underground maze. "They were alive down here," Sullivan said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "For how long, we don't know, but they were alive." The evidence painted a picture of captivity, of 3 women trapped in an environment designed to be their tomb. Yet the careful placement of their belongings suggested they had maintained hope, leaving clues for anyone who might eventually find them. The investigation team expanded their search of the sewer system, mapping every tunnel and chamber connected to the hospital. What they discovered was an underground network far more complex than city records indicated. Abandoned sections from the early 1900s connected to newer construction, creating a labyrinth that few people knew existed. In one of these forgotten tunnels, they found evidence of habitation. Makeshift bedding, empty food containers, and medical supplies suggested someone had been living in the sewers for an extended period. The supplies were recent, some bearing expiration dates from after the nurse's disappearance. Someone was still down there, still active in the underground world beneath the city. The medical supplies were particularly troubling. Surgical instruments, IV bags, and prescription medications suggested someone with medical training was operating in the sewers. The medications were powerful, the type used for sedation and pain management. Their presence implied a level of medical knowledge that made the investigation team reconsider their assumptions about the perpetrator. Dr. Hendricks reviewed the list of medications found in the underground cache. "These are restricted drugs," she explained, her face pale with the implications. "They require special authorization to obtain. Someone with access to hospital supplies has been providing these medications." The revelation that the perpetrator might be connected to the medical community sent new waves of fear through St. Mary's staff. Hospital employment records were cross-referenced with the investigation findings. Current and former employees who had access to restricted medications were identified and interviewed. The process was painstaking, as the hospital employed thousands of people across multiple departments. But patterns began to emerge. 3 former employees had been terminated for drug-related violations in the past 5 years. 2 had been dismissed for inappropriate behavior toward patients. 1 had been fired for unauthorized access to restricted areas of the hospital. All had worked shifts that would have given them knowledge of the hospital's layout and staff schedules. But it was the discovery of a 4th name that broke the case wide open. Dr. Marcus Kellerman, a former emergency room physician, had been quietly dismissed from St. Mary's 6 months before the nurses disappeared. His termination had been kept confidential, but the records showed a pattern of increasingly erratic behavior and violations of hospital protocol. Dr. Kellerman's personnel file painted a picture of a brilliant physician whose career had been destroyed by personal demons, substance abuse, patient complaints, and conflicts with colleagues had led to his dismissal. But his medical knowledge and familiarity with the hospital's layout made him a prime suspect in the nurse's disappearance. The search for Dr. Kellerman led investigators to a condemned apartment building on the outskirts of the city. The building had been scheduled for demolition, its residents relocated months earlier. But signs of recent occupancy were evident in one of the upper floor units, where someone had been living without electricity or running water. The apartment was a shrine to obsession. Photographs of St. Mary's General Hospital covered the walls, many taken from vantage points that suggested surveillance. Floor plans of the hospital were spread across a makeshift table, with the basement level highlighted in red ink. Most disturbing were the photographs of hospital staff, including clear images of Emma Rodriguez, Sarah Chen, and Nicole Thompson. Medical textbooks and journals were scattered throughout the apartment, many open to pages describing surgical procedures and patient care. But the marginalia told a different story. Handwritten notes in the margins revealed a mind consumed with revenge fantasies and delusions of medical grandeur. The nurses weren't random victims. They had been specifically targeted. A journal found beneath a pile of medical texts provided insight into Dr. Kellerman's mental state in the months following his dismissal. The entries began as complaints about unfair treatment and professional persecution, but they gradually devolved into detailed plans for revenge against the hospital and its staff. The final entries, dated just days before the nurses disappeared, were filled with references to teaching them a lesson and showing them real medicine. The journal also contained detailed maps of the city's sewer system, including sections that didn't appear on official city records. Dr. Kellerman had spent months exploring the underground network, identifying entry points and hidden chambers. His knowledge of the subterranean world was extensive, explaining how he could move 3 captive nurses through the system without detection. But the most chilling discovery was a list of names. Hospital staff members who had been involved in Dr. Kellerman's dismissal, including supervisors, colleagues, and administrators. The 3 missing nurses were on the list, their names highlighted in red. Other names were crossed out, suggesting they had been eliminated from consideration. The list implied that the nurses' disappearance was part of a larger plan for revenge. Detective Sullivan issued an immediate alert for Dr. Kellerman's arrest. His photograph was distributed to law enforcement agencies across the region, and surveillance was placed on known associates and former residences. But the search would prove more challenging than anyone anticipated. Dr. Kellerman had spent months preparing for this moment, and he had vanished as completely as the nurses themselves. The investigation took on new urgency as the reality of the situation became clear. This wasn't just a case of missing persons. It was an active threat to the entire hospital community. Dr. Kellerman's journal suggested that the nurse's disappearance was only the beginning of his revenge plan. Other staff members remained at risk, and the perpetrator was still at large. Hospital security was increased, with additional guards posted at all entrances and exits. Staff members were advised to travel in groups and avoid isolated areas of the building. The basement level was sealed off completely, with access restricted to essential personnel only. But the damage to morale was already done. The knowledge that one of their own had turned predator shattered the sense of safety that had defined St. Mary's for decades. As winter deepened and the investigation stretched into its 8th month, the families of the missing nurses struggled with the new information. The discovery of Sarah's badge had provided confirmation of their worst fears, but it had also given them something they hadn't had before: certainty. The nurses hadn't simply vanished. They had been taken by someone who knew them, someone who had worked alongside them. The badge itself became a symbol of both hope and despair. It proved that the nurses had been alive after their disappearance, that they had left clues for those who would eventually search for them. But it also confirmed that they had been trapped in an underground nightmare, far from help and hope of rescue. The sewer workers who had found the badge were hailed as heroes by the families. Marcus Webb and Jerome Collins had done more than discover evidence. They had given the families answers that law enforcement had been unable to provide. The badge was the key that unlocked a mystery that had consumed the city for months, revealing a truth more disturbing than anyone had imagined. But even as the investigation focused on Dr. Kellerman, questions remained. The evidence suggested that the nurses had been held captive in the sewer system, but their ultimate fate remained unknown. No bodies had been found, no definitive proof of their deaths. The possibility that they might still be alive, trapped somewhere in the underground maze, kept hope flickering in the hearts of those who loved them. The city's sewer system became the focus of an unprecedented search operation. Teams of investigators and rescue workers combed every tunnel, chamber, and forgotten passage in the network. The search was dangerous, requiring specialized equipment and expertise to navigate the treacherous underground environment. But it was also necessary, driven by the slim possibility that the nurses might still be found alive. As the search continued, the story of the 3 missing nurses became a cautionary tale about the dangers that could lurk within seemingly safe institutions. St. Mary's General Hospital once a symbol of healing and hope, had become the setting for a nightmare that challenged everything the community believed about trust and safety. The investigation had revealed that evil could hide behind professional credentials and institutional authority. Dr. Kellerman's betrayal of his medical oath and his colleagues' trust had created a wound that would take years to heal. The discovery of Sarah Chen's badge in the sewer system was just the beginning of a reckoning that would reshape how the community viewed those entrusted with their care. But even as the search for answers continued, the mystery of the three nurses' fate remained unsolved. The badge had provided crucial evidence, but it had also raised new questions about what had happened in the dark tunnels beneath the city. The truth, like the nurses themselves, remained hidden in the shadows, waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to venture into the darkness below. As investigators worked through the night, the implications of the discovery began to sink in. The sewer workers hadn't just found evidence of the missing nurses, they'd uncovered proof of a carefully orchestrated underground operation that had been running for months, possibly years. Detective Martinez arrived at the scene with a team of forensic specialists, their equipment designed to navigate the treacherous conditions of the city's underbelly. The tunnels were mapped, photographed, and searched inch by inch. What they found painted a disturbing picture of calculated predation. The makeshift living areas weren't random shelters. They were strategically placed staging points throughout the tunnel system. Each location had been carefully chosen to remain hidden from city maintenance crews while providing access to different parts of the underground network. The medical supplies weren't just random hospital items, but specific medications used for sedation and pain management. Sarah Chen's ID badge became the key that unlocked a much larger investigation. When forensics analyzed the badge, they discovered it had been deliberately placed in that specific location. The scratches on the plastic weren't from water damage or debris, they were intentional markings, a crude but effective communication system. The investigation team realized they weren't just dealing with a kidnapping case. They were confronting something far more sinister, a systematic operation that had been using the city's forgotten spaces to hold victims captive. The evidence suggested that Dr. Kellerman hadn't been working alone, and that the three nurses might not have been his first victims. As word spread through the hospital, staff members began coming forward with information they'd previously dismissed as unimportant. Several nurses reported seeing Kellerman in areas where he shouldn't have been during his final weeks at the hospital. Security footage was reviewed, revealing a pattern of behavior that had gone unnoticed at the time. The breakthrough came when investigators discovered Kellerman's detailed journals hidden in his abandoned apartment. The writings revealed a mind consumed by revenge and a methodical plan that had been years in the making. He'd studied the hospital's layout, memorized staff schedules, and most chillingly, identified specific targets based on perceived slights and professional grievances. But the journals also revealed something else, references to the others, and mentions of a network that extended beyond the hospital walls. Kellerman had been in contact with individuals who shared his twisted worldview, people who had helped him plan and execute his scheme. The search expanded beyond the immediate area where Sarah's badge was found. Teams worked around the clock, following the tunnel system's branching paths and exploring every possible hiding place. The city's infrastructure maps were studied and cross-referenced with Kellerman's notes, revealing a complex web of interconnected passages that few people knew existed. 3 days after the initial discovery, searchers found the first major breakthrough. Deep in a section of tunnel that had been abandoned for decades, they discovered a crude but functional laboratory. Medical equipment, stolen from various hospitals throughout the city, had been arranged to create a makeshift treatment facility. The implications were terrifying. This wasn't just about holding victims captive, but about conducting unauthorized medical procedures. The laboratory contained evidence of multiple victims. Personal belongings, medical records, and photographs suggested that at least a dozen people had been held in this underground facility over the past 2 years. The 3 nurses from St. Mary's were just the most recent victims in a much larger pattern of disappearances. As the investigation deepened, connections emerged between Kellerman and several other dismissed medical professionals throughout the region. A network of disgraced doctors, nurses, and technicians had been operating in the shadows, using their medical knowledge for increasingly dark purposes. They'd been systematically targeting healthcare workers who they believed had wronged them or stood in their way. The public was horrified as details emerged. The idea that trusted medical professionals could orchestrate such a scheme shattered the community's faith in the healthcare system. Hospital administrators across the city implemented new security measures and began reviewing their own personnel policies. But the most pressing question remained unanswered. Where were Emma, Sarah, and Nicole now? The evidence suggested they'd been moved multiple times throughout the tunnel system, but their current location remained unknown. Time was running out, and investigators feared that Kellerman's network was already planning to relocate their operation to avoid detection. The families of the missing nurses held vigil outside the hospital, their hope renewed by the discovery, but tempered by the growing understanding of what their loved ones had endured. The community rallied around them, organizing search parties and providing support as the investigation continued. As the 4th day of intensive searching began, investigators made another crucial discovery. Hidden in a section of tunnel that required specialized equipment to access, they found what appeared to be Kellerman's central command post. Maps, photographs, and detailed surveillance notes covered the walls, revealing the extent of his obsession with the hospital and its staff. The command post also contained communication equipment that had been used to coordinate with other members of his network. Phone records and encrypted messages provided investigators with leads that extended far beyond the local area. The operation had tentacles reaching into multiple states, involving individuals who had been planning similar attacks on healthcare facilities across the country. The realization that this was part of a larger conspiracy sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies nationwide. The FBI was called in to coordinate the investigation, and hospitals throughout the region were placed on high alert. The 3 missing nurses had become symbols of a much larger threat to public safety. As the investigation entered its 5th day, exhausted searchers continued their methodical exploration of the tunnel system. The underground network seemed to stretch endlessly, with new passages and hidden chambers discovered regularly. Each new area brought the possibility of finding the missing nurses, but also the fear of uncovering more evidence of the network's crimes. The breakthrough everyone had been hoping for came at dawn on the sixth day. A search team, following a series of fresh footprints deep in the tunnel system, heard faint sounds echoing through the darkness. Following the sounds led them to a reinforced door that had been carefully concealed behind a false wall. Inside, they found what appeared to be the network's primary holding facility. The space had been converted into a crude but functional prison with multiple cells and a central area that had been used for the network's twisted medical experiments. The facility was empty, but evidence suggested it had been hastily abandoned within the past 24 hours. The discovery of the holding facility marked a turning point in the investigation. While the immediate danger to the missing nurses remained, law enforcement now had a clear picture of the scope and organization of the network they were fighting. The hunt for Dr. Kellerman and his accomplices intensified, with resources from multiple agencies focused on tracking down the perpetrators and finding the victims before it was too late. The investigation into the 3 missing nurses had consumed the entire city, with law enforcement agencies working around the clock to unravel the complex web of deception that had emerged from the depths of the sewer system. The discovery of Sarah Chen's ID badge had been just the beginning of a nightmare that stretched far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Federal agents had descended upon St. Mary's Hospital, transforming the basement levels into a command center buzzing with activity. The service elevator that had been the nurse's last known location became ground zero for a massive forensic investigation. Every surface was dusted for prints, every security camera reviewed frame by frame, and every employee subjected to intensive questioning. Detective Martinez found himself working alongside FBI Special Agent Rebecca Torres, a seasoned investigator with 20 years of experience in organized crime. Together, they pieced together the disturbing timeline that had led to this moment. The evidence pointed to a carefully orchestrated operation that had been years in the making, with Dr. Kellerman's dismissal serving as the catalyst for something far more sinister. The underground network they had discovered was vast and sophisticated. Tunnels connected multiple buildings across the city, some dating back to the Prohibition era, others recently excavated. The makeshift laboratories contained equipment that would have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, all funded through a complex money laundering scheme that investigators were still trying to unravel. Emma Rodriguez's personal effects had been found in one of the underground chambers, along with evidence that suggested she had been held there for an extended period. Her nursing badge, torn and stained, was discovered alongside medical charts that detailed unauthorized procedures. The handwriting on these documents matched samples taken from Dr. Kellerman's former office, confirming his involvement in the operation. Nicole Thompson's whereabouts remained the most mysterious aspect of the case. While evidence of her presence had been found throughout the underground facility, there were signs that she had been moved recently. Fresh footprints in the dust, disturbed equipment, and a hastily abandoned meal suggested that someone had been using the facility as recently as days before its discovery. The investigation revealed that Dr. Kellerman had not been working alone. Phone records showed communication with individuals across multiple states, and financial records indicated payments to various contractors and suppliers. The scope of the operation was international, with connections to similar disappearances in hospitals across the country. Agent Torres had seen cases like this before, though never on such a scale. The pattern was always the same: respected medical professionals with access to vulnerable patients, elaborate schemes to cover their tracks, and a network of accomplices who helped facilitate the crimes. What made this case unique was the level of planning and the infrastructure that had been put in place. The city's mayor held daily press conferences, assuring the public that every resource was being dedicated to finding the missing nurses. Families gathered outside the hospital, holding vigils and demanding answers. The media coverage was relentless, with reporters following every lead and interviewing anyone with a connection to the case. Dr. Kellerman's former colleagues were shocked by the revelations. Many described him as a brilliant but troubled man who had become increasingly bitter after his dismissal. His research into experimental treatments had been controversial, pushing the boundaries of medical ethics. When the hospital administration had finally acted, it may have been too late to prevent the tragedy that was now unfolding. The underground chambers contained evidence of multiple victims beyond the 3 nurses. Personal belongings, medical records, and photographs suggested that this operation had been claiming victims for years. The FBI had opened investigations into dozens of missing persons cases, looking for connections to the network they had uncovered. Sarah Chen's family had been informed of the discovery, though they were told few details about the ongoing investigation. Her parents flew in from California, desperate for any information about their daughter's fate. They spent hours at the hospital, hoping against hope that she might still be found alive. The technical analysis of the underground facility revealed sophisticated ventilation systems, power supplies, and communication networks. This wasn't the work of a single disturbed individual, but rather a coordinated effort involving multiple skilled professionals. The engineering required to create such a facility would have taken months or even years to complete. Detective Martinez had been working 18-hour days, following every lead and pursuing every angle. The case had consumed his life, but he refused to give up. He had made a promise to the families of the missing nurses, and he intended to keep it. The discovery of the underground network had given him hope that the women might still be alive, though he knew that time was running out. The hospital's administration had been cooperative, providing access to personnel files and security footage. However, the investigation had revealed serious gaps in their security protocols. The fact that 3 nurses could disappear from the building without anyone noticing for hours raised serious questions about the hospital's procedures. As the investigation continued, more details emerged about the scope of the criminal enterprise. Bank records showed transactions totaling millions of dollars, with money flowing through a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts. The financial trail led to multiple countries, suggesting that this was truly an international operation. The psychological profile of Dr. Kellerman painted a picture of a man driven by a combination of professional ambition and personal revenge. His research had been focused on experimental treatments that pushed the boundaries of medical ethics. When he was dismissed from the hospital, he had apparently decided to continue his work through illegal means. The search for the missing nurses had expanded beyond the city, with law enforcement agencies across the country on alert. The interstate nature of the conspiracy meant that federal resources were being deployed, including specialized units trained in handling complex criminal enterprises. Local news stations provided continuous coverage of the investigation, with reporters stationed outside the hospital and at various locations connected to the case. The story had captured national attention, with major networks sending their own teams to cover the unfolding drama. The families of the missing nurses had formed a support group, meeting regularly to share information and provide emotional support to one another. They had hired their own private investigator to supplement the official investigation, determined to leave no stone unturned in their search for answers. The hospital workers who had known the three nurses described them as dedicated professionals who had chosen their careers out of a genuine desire to help others. Emma Rodriguez had been studying to become a nurse practitioner. Sarah Chen had been involved in community health programs, and Nicole Thompson had been known for her compassionate care of elderly patients. The investigation had revealed that the underground network had been used for more than just holding the nurses. Evidence suggested that it had been the site of illegal medical experiments, with victims being subjected to unauthorized procedures. The full extent of the crimes committed in these hidden chambers was still being determined. As federal agents continued to process the crime scene, they made additional discoveries that deepened the mystery. Hidden rooms contained sophisticated medical equipment, including surgical instruments and monitoring devices. The level of organization suggested that this had been a long-term operation with multiple participants. The case had shaken the medical community, raising questions about how such an elaborate criminal enterprise could have operated undetected for so long. Medical boards across the country were reviewing their oversight procedures, and hospitals were implementing additional security measures to prevent similar incidents. Detective Martinez knew that time was critical. With each passing day, the chances of finding the nurses alive diminished. The investigation had revealed the scope of the conspiracy, but the location of the victims remained unknown. The underground network was vast, and there were likely other facilities that had not yet been discovered. The city's residents were on edge, with many questioning their safety and the security of their local medical facilities. The revelation that such a sophisticated criminal operation could exist beneath their feet had shattered their sense of security. Many were demanding answers about how such a thing could have been allowed to happen. As the investigation entered its most critical phase, law enforcement agencies prepared for what they hoped would be the final push to locate the missing nurses. The evidence they had gathered painted a disturbing picture of a criminal enterprise that had operated in the shadows for years, but it also provided hope that the victims might still be found alive. The story of the three missing nurses had become a symbol of the vulnerabilities that existed within trusted institutions. Their disappearance had exposed a network of corruption and criminality that reached far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. As the investigation continued, the entire city held its breath, hoping for the safe return of three women who had dedicated their lives to caring for others.